Her shadow loomed unnaturally large on the wall behind her. "You trust me, don't it?" I swallowed hard and nodded, though my instinct screamed at me to run. "Good. Now wash your face," she commanded, holding the bowl out to me. Her grin had faded, replaced by an expression I couldn't read. Expectant, almost hungry. I hesitated, but Keisha's eyes bored into me, daring me to refuse. Something about Keisha's wide grin made my stomach churn, but the shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward me, and the whispers grew louder. I clutched the scarf tighter and nodded. Anything was better than staying alone with the voices. The water was icy cold, biting into my skin. Slowly, I leaned over the bowl and splashed the cold, starchy water onto my face, shivering as the chill seeped into my bones. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the room shifted. The candlelight dimmed until it barely illuminated the space, and the air felt heavier. The shadows grew sharper and more defined, and the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. I blinked, trying to clear the water from my eyes. When I opened them, I froze. The kitchen wasn't the same. The walls were cracked and peeling, the ceiling sagging as though it had been abandoned for years. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. My reflection in the window above the sink stared back at me, but something was off. My features seemed blurred, as if they weren't entirely my own. My reflection stared back at me with a sly grin and a chipped tooth. "Keisha," I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. I turned to look at her, and my breath caught in my throat. Her shadow on the wall didn't match her movements. It stood still, its arms outstretched, while Keisha's real hands rested casually on her hips. A cold voice echoed behind me. "Too late, child. You done called them now." I spun around to see Miss Elvie standing outside the doorway, her face grave. Her shadow stretched impossibly long across the kitchen floor, its edges flickering like flames. "Run," she whispered. A figure stood in the doorway. It was tall and gaunt, its face hidden in shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers, and it began to move toward me. "Me say me woulda come back," a voice hissed, low and menacing. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. Who ya?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a skeletal hand and pointed at me. The whispers turned into a cacophony, filling my ears with unintelligible chants. I ran into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. It followed, growing louder, almost taunting. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady my breathing. Then I saw it. The cracked mirror on the dresser reflected the room in fragments, and in the largest shard, my reflection stared back. But it wasn't me. It was Keisha. Her grin stretched too wide, her eyes glinting with mischief and something darker. She tilted her head, as if mocking my terror. "Run all you want, Nathan," the reflection said in a sing-song voice. "You can't hide." I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. My reflection didn't move with me. It stayed in the mirror, still grinning. "Stop!" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut on its own. The windows rattled violently as if something outside was trying to get in. "Are out! Miss Elvie!" I screamed, banging on the door. Behind me, the figure moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder and saw its face, if it could even be called that. Hollow eyes, a wide, toothy grin, and skin that looked as though it had been stretched too tightly over its bones. "You shouldn't come here," it whispered, its voice a mix of Keisha's and something much darker. Tears streamed down my face as I pressed myself against the door. "Me sorry. Me never mean to..." Before I could finish, the figure lunged, its hand reaching for my face. "Stop!" Miss Elvie's voice boomed through the bedroom, opening the door in an instant, filled with a power that made the air vibrate. The figure froze, its grin faltering as it turned toward her. "Elvie," it growled, its voice dripping with malice. Miss Elvie stepped forward, her face stern and her eyes blazing. She held a bundle of herbs in one hand and a lit candle in the other. "Leave the picnic alone, you hear me?" the figure hissed, retreating slightly, but its eyes never left me. "Elvie, you can't stop me," it said, its grin returning. "The ritual done. In mine now." "What ritual?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Miss Elvie didn't answer. She began chanting the words of Psalms, her words strong and rhythmic. The figure writhed as though in pain, its form flickering like a dying flame. But then it laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think this over? Me not done yet." With a final piercing scream, the figure vanished, leaving only the smell of burnt wood behind. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Miss Elvie knelt beside me, her stern expression softening. "Yeah, all right, Pickney?" she asked, wiping the tears from my face. I nodded weakly, though my body trembled uncontrollably. "She take your innocence," Miss Elvie murmured, her voice heavy with sorrow. "But you're strong. You will fight. Rest now." When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cot in the parlor. The morning sun streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. My mother's face hovered over me, her eyes filled with concern. "Nathan, you all right?" she asked softly, brushing my hair back. Miss Elvie stood behind her, holding a steaming cup of tea. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired. "The 9-night done, Pickney," she said. "Everything fine now." But I didn't feel fine. The air still felt heavy, and the whispers lingered faintly in the back of my mind. I sat up slowly, my body aching as if I'd been running for hours. As we prepared to leave, my mother fussing over me, something caught my eye. The old tarnished mirror on the wall reflected the room perfectly. But as I glanced at my reflection, I froze. For a brief moment, Keisha's face stared back at me, her grin as wide and mischievous as ever. She winked before her image dissolved into my own. I gasped, stepping back. Ms. Elvie's hand rested gently on my shoulder. Her voice was soft, but heavy with meaning. "Some spirits don't rest easy, and some bodies no stay empty long." Her words echoed in my mind as we left the house, the shadows of the 9-night following close behind. The village felt different as we walked home. The sunlight seemed duller, the chirping of birds strangely muted. I clutched my mother's hand tightly, my small fingers trembling in her firm grip. "You're sure, ya? All right, Nathan?" she asked, glancing down at me with worried eyes. I nodded quickly, unwilling to tell her what I saw in the mirror. How could I? She'd think I was making it up, but my heart knew the truth. Keisha wasn't gone.
Keisha's not done yet. Will Nathan ever be free from her grip? Stay tuned for part 3 of The 9-Night Visitor. The nightmare isn't over.